You know, a lot of people have asked me why the FTR Carbon is called the Carbon. Well, I think it might have something to do with the carbon fiber and some of the carbon fiber and, oh, there's some more carbon fiber right there and right there and right there. Oh, and there's carbon fiber right there. Hopefully this helps elucidate why the FTR Carbon is called the Carbon. That is right, folks. Today we are taking a look at the Indian FTR Carbon R. This one right here, one of the limited run 582. So says the dashboard right there. This motorcycle is a spicy meatball. Not your average slice of apple pie, but it is a ton of fun. And the new standard, the quintessential American brawler motorcycle. I'm super excited to spend the day with it. And you know what? Let's just skip the preamble, dive right into my first impressions. Okay, folks, so before we dive too far into this one, full disclosure, I have actually ridden this particular motorcycle before. It's been a while, though. I rode it when I was back at Yammy Noob. We did a video on this, Whitney and I did, between this and the FTR that we were giving away, which was 19, I think. So I have some experience on this motorcycle, but I am going to give you my first impressions. But of course, gotta give you an exhaust clip, right? This thing is an absolute animal. Ton of fun, and let's get it out on the road. So the first thing that you're gonna notice, man, when you get on this bike is how much torque it has. Holy cow, does this thing have a ton of torque. It's like, man, it's hard to tell. Again, I haven't looked at the specs or anything, but jeez, man, that feels like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 80 to 90 foot-pounds of torque. It accelerates like crazy. This thing is just like the old FTR, a stoplight to stoplight weapon. It's so quick. It doesn't feel fast, it feels quick. Now, what's the difference? Fast, that's a motorcycle that's, you know, it does like deep in the triple digits. It goes 150 miles, 186 miles an hour, like, you know, your Gixxer 600. This is not going to go that fast, but it accelerates really quickly. So it'll get to like 115, but it'll do it in the blink of an eye, you know? That's usually what I consider the difference between fast and quick. Holy cow, that torque. It's insane how much torque this motor produces. You know, the thing is this is derived from the Scout motor, right? The Scout motor's at 1133cc, I believe. That number's coming off the dome, so I'll correct it if it needs to. But yeah, it's that 1133cc liquid-cooled V-twin, and when I rode the Scout before, I was like, you know what? This is a bad cruiser engine. And I still stand by it, because all this engine wants to do is accelerate. Holy cow. Does it just want to go fast all the time. It's eliciting some different riding behavior out of me, because all it wants to do is just go, you know? As I've been riding it, the most rewarding thing you can do with it is treat the throttle like a light switch. Just wide open everywhere. That's where it's the most fun to ride. Now, you will notice I have it in sport mode. I actually did goof around a little bit with it in standard mode, and standard mode is actually pretty good on this from what I can tell. Let me drop it back in there. I really don't like this though. You have to like go into the gauge and then go down to standard and then select it and then you're good. So, unlike the MT09, which, you know, the different modes felt weirdly neutered, this mode just feels a little bit more chill. It feels like the bike is still in good shape, but not like it's no longer fun to ride. You know what I mean? It's still a good motorcycle, even in standard mode. Let's drop it into rain and see what that's all about. So we're in rain mode. Yeah, okay, that is a super standard rain mode right there, where the initial throttle roll-on is really controlled, and then everything else is just, you know, the bike as it normally is. It feels like standard mode with less initial throttle, which is what you would want. All right, let's put it back in sport mode. So the biggest question that I always had about these bikes is, how do they handle? Because, you know, even when you get it up off the side stand, you're like, this is a heavy motorcycle. But with the 17s, it gets on line and it holds the line really, really well. Despite having a long wheelbase, it's actually surprisingly agile. Side to side, it's a little slower than, you know, maybe the MT09 was, but not by a significant enough portion for a street rider to care. It definitely just feels good. It feels good around a corner. Last thing I want to talk about here before we move on to the next segment is I did want to mention that the suspension has been set for factory settings, which that factory recommended feels a little bit funny on the side of the tire. I think it needs more preload, and when I pull over next, I'm going to adjust the preload to, or at least see if I can quickly adjust it like I could on the MT09. It was just a knob that you turn. So if that's available here, I am going to do that for later. But initial impressions on this motorcycle, a ton of fun, very sporting, but it definitely has some issues that we're going to talk about. And in fact, why don't we pull over and start having a conversation about the specs on this motorcycle, some of the good stuff and some of the bad stuff that I've noticed, because this package is a little bit more characterful, shall we say, than the MT09 was, and that is in the Ducati sense. So let's have a quick chat about all that. Diving into the specs on the FTR right here, this thing is powered by a 1203cc liquid-cooled V-twin, a big old slice of American beef, and it is a heavy boy too. This thing is weighing 521 pounds, wet and ready to ride. A lot of that is coming from the engine, and a lot of it is coming from the overbuilt trellis frame on this thing. This is a chunky frame. However, this thing is putting down 120 horsepower and 87 foot-pounds of torque. So despite its weight, this thing accelerates really, really rapidly. And I was pretty darn close with my 80 to 90 foot-pounds of torque. It feels every bit like that when it's out on the road. This bike right here is the Carbon, which means that A, it's numbered, B, it's got all the carbon fiber farkles, and C, it is fitted with Olin suspension from the factory. Now, unfortunately, what we're seeing here is that no two Olin setups feel the same, because the MT09, its Olins felt great, and this one is having me channel my inner AC/DC. Oy, oy, oy. However, while it might not be the most comfortable thing on the road, it is really nice when you get it on the side of the tire, and fitted with these big old Brembo brakes as well as braided lines, it stops every bit as well as it goes. Now, one thing I did miss last time was I forgot to give you guys an ergo check. So mounting up on this motorcycle real quick, you do notice that I've got a pretty substantial bend in my knee. However, the seat is pretty tall. Moving my legs up on the pegs, these are some aggressive ergonomics on here from the hips down. These are some aggressive pegs. But I mean, it's a sport bike, right? So you want slightly more aggressive peg feel. On the road, it translates to a really comfortable upper half and a slightly cramped lower half. But for my 6'4" self with a 32-inch inseam, it's not bad at all. Now, I did want to dive right into my favorite and least favorite things on this motorcycle, because while it's a ton of fun, it's not perfect. And a lot of my problems come from this motorcycle when it's not at 100%, when you're not going very fast on it. The throttle is really herky-jerky down low, and this is something that you see on a lot of these Scout and FTR bikes. They're lurchy. Something going on at Indian with their fueling doesn't feel great. However, everywhere else in the power band, when you're on the throttle, it feels awesome. This motorcycle goes like a stabbed rat. When you point it, it goes exactly where you want it to. It is a ton of fun. One thing I do love on this bike too is because it's got the Acra system and the owner has taken the baffles out on this motorcycle, the noise is pretty much perfect, and you can hear the intake, you can hear the exhaust, and it's a really sonorous place to sit. It's got this deep bellow that you can only get from a big V-twin with a really nice exhaust system. I wouldn't decat this bike, I wouldn't do anything else with it, I would just ride it as it is. The last thing that really irks me on this motorcycle is the menus. The menus on this bike, while it does have a touchscreen dash, are such a pain in the butt to navigate. Why isn't there just a mode button? Why do I have to go into the menu and select what mode I want? Especially when I'm riding, that's something that's super, super annoying to have to do. Now, with all that being said, it's time to get this motorcycle back on the road and see what it's like as a commuter.
Hold up, real quick, I wanted to take a second and shout out Shifty Brisket, a member on the Discord server who gave a generous donation to help me upgrade my camera. Before I was filming on a sub 1080p crop sensor camera, and now I'm working with a Lumix GH6, which is insane. I'm sure you guys have seen the change in the image quality in the videos, and that's all thanks to him, so a big thanks to him for helping me step up my production quality. If you wanted to reach out or help support the channel, all the links are in the description below. Okay, now let's get back to the video.
So I can't imagine that you're coming to the FTR Carbon for your commuter, but let's say, for example, that you are. What can you expect out of this on your average highway? Well, first and foremost, the weight on this motorcycle makes it super stable on the highway. I love that. When you're commuting on a bike, you actually do want some weight. When I'm commuting on the smc-r, it's really easy for that motorcycle to get blown around, and that kind of bums me out, because especially as you get higher and higher speeds in Texas, like say 80 to 85, which pretty much everybody cruises at, that bike really starts to wander a lot, and this motorcycle tracks so straight that it makes it easy to commute on. Same deal with the wind blast. Because the dash is so low and there's no big mirrors on here, well, mostly because you went with the bar ends, the wind blast is really smooth, hitting you in the chest, so it's actually pretty comfortable. I'm not getting a lot of buffeting off the dashboard. I'm not getting, you know, a bunch of noise on my helmet. I'm just getting this really nice laminar flow. And oh, this is the ultimate stoplight to stoplight weapon. Oh man, if you can get this thing from the dig, there are very few motorcycles that can keep up with this thing. I remember taking the old FTR to the track with the 19s, the racetrack drag strip, and it was outclassing Ducatis, it was outclassing the Fireblade. From a dig, very few things can keep up with this motorcycle. It is shockingly fast. And that long wheelbase really does help. However, one thing that definitely annoys me is how small the gas tank is on this bike, coupled with how bad it is for average fuel economy. Part of that is definitely because I ride this thing like my brain is very small, so it's just that all the time. But, you know, this thing encourages you to ride like that. You know, you might say, well, Spite, drop it down into standard mode. Well, sure, okay, let me do that for you. You go into the menu, click through it, which, oh my god, this sucks while you're doing it on the road. This really is a bummer. Okay, standard. We're in standard mode now. It's still getting ready to lift the front wheel. So it's still an absolute animal regardless of whether or not you're in sport mode or whether or not you're in standard mode. It's just a little bit smoother. Just a little bit smoother. So, I don't know. It's this weird thing where if your commute to the office is really short, okay, sure, absolutely. But if you're really going to be living with this motorcycle, you're going to run into this issue a lot like the old Sportsters, where you run out of gas all the time. You know, it claims I have 103 on the dash, and when I filled it up, because I actually got this 24 miles worth of range, I filled it up, which is actually really convenient, and it gave me 136. Then I rode it for a little bit and it immediately went to 101, and then it went up to 118. So this thing has no idea how far it can go on a full tank, which, if that matters to you, the FTR might not exactly be the best choice for you. Now, there are some really nice amenities on this motorcycle, like cruise control. Super easy to use the cruise control on here. It's just 2 buttons. On, down, and you're good to go, right? Just like that. And it's got the roll forward to kill option on it, which is super nice. Love when bikes do that, because I don't like having to smush a button to clear it, but it works really well. One thing that I did mention a little earlier on was the stop and go quality of this bike. The transmission is great, right? The transmission, tons of fun to use. It's very, very clicky. It's very snickety. You're not gonna miss shifts on here. But when you gear up, there's so much torque down low that it's just like, every time you shift gears. So it's this brawl of a motorcycle to ride, and it can be a bit of a handful, I'm not gonna lie. So as a commuter, this would not be my first choice. It's almost like Indian did not anticipate a lot of people commuting on this motorcycle. Let's be real, this is a weekend warrior kind of motorcycle, a ton of fun to ride in the twisties, and as a commuter, it definitely suffers for it. You know, the seat's pretty stiff, the suspension is pretty stiff, the ride is great, and the throttle's pretty damn potent, but it's not a great commuting package. So with all that being said, let's pull the bike over and answer some Discord questions about this motorcycle, because I have a feeling the boys are going to have a few things they want to know about the old FTR. All right, diving on into the Discord Q&A. Our first question today comes from Warscribe. Is the Carbon worth the money over the other FTR option packages? Okay, so forgot to mention this in the specs section, but this bike right here is $17,000. You can get the Championship Edition for $16,500, and then you can get the base model FTR S, which is about $15,000, $14,999, I believe. I wouldn't say I would run out and grab this one over any other version of the FTR. This one really just has some really cool Farkles on it. The Öhlins are nice, but I don't think they're necessarily a requirement. And, you know, it's still making the same amount of power in the other tiers. So you can get away with a lot of what's on the base model FTR, and you wouldn't have to fork over a little bit of extra money for the Öhlins. The Dr. Zero asks, how does it compare to the original one with the 19-inch front end, and which one do I prefer? I definitely prefer this one. With the 19-inch front end, it feels a little bit extra wonky. It's really heavy to turn in. This feels like a normal motorcycle the way it's set up. It definitely feels more mainline, I suppose. There's a little less character without the 19, but I would imagine for the average rider, having the 17s is really nice. All right, Corgi asks, do you wish that Indian pushed it further into the sporty aspects? Also, which would you prefer to have, the FTR Carbon or Chick-fil-A for life? Well, to answer the first one, This motorcycle's already pretty darn sporty. I think if they committed too much more to the sporty aspect, you'd lose a little bit of what makes this bike special. I like how it's got a long wheelbase, how it's got this rowdy muscle bike character. I wouldn't want that to go away for the sake of sportiness. Now, would I rather have this or a lifetime of unlimited Chick-fil-A? I mean, that is a good spicy chicken sandwich, so it's really hard to say. But, you know, $17,000 does buy you a lot of Chick-fil-A on this, so I think I would take this, ride it around for a little bit, flip it, and then buy a whole bunch of sandwiches. Shallowman411 here asks a question that I have thought long and hard about, and I don't think I have an answer for. What is the FTR's most direct competition in my mind? I don't know. I've never known, honestly. I wouldn't put this up against a motorcycle in the middleweight category, you know, like the Duke 890 or the MT09. That's not really for the same rider, nor would I necessarily say it's like a Monster 1200. It's a really unique riding experience, and it's not one that fits very well into defined motorcycle categories. It's really sort of, as much as I hate to say it, a boutique riding experience. A lot of stuff going for this motorcycle that causes it to not really compare well against other bikes. The Lava Melon asks, how big of a jump is it for the FTR from a smaller bike like the SV650 or MT07? Honestly, the biggest thing you're gonna notice is how much torque this thing has. It is so crazy torquey down low that it might surprise you, but honestly, it's not outrageously fast compared to those bikes. It is a little bit heavier, but you don't really notice the weight when it's down low because it's really well balanced, but it's not like a meteoric step. I think it would be more extreme to go from an MT07 to an MT09 than to go from an MT07 to the FTR1200. Illbald asks, I've read that the FTR is pretty nimble and fast. Could it be a twisty road / occasional track toy? Absolutely. I think that's really where it's best, honestly. I wouldn't use this as a commuter motorcycle. This is my weekend toy if I'm gonna buy one. It's got a lot of character, and it's best when you're just pinning it full throttle. So I would take this to a track more so than I would take it on the highway. Uber Howard asks, FTR or Sportster S? FTR. Sportster S is really, really cool, but it's a really uncomfortable, really small motorcycle. This takes everything that I love about Sportster S and puts it into a more normal, more naked package. And I wish Harley would get off their ass and just release the Bronx, because this thing is crying for some American competition. And honestly, I think that 1250 might give this thing a run for its money. Green G asks, how is the suspension on your back? I've had 2 surgeries on my lower back, and a lot of bikes are pretty painful. Honestly, man, this is not the right bike for you. I've been riding around with my camera bag. I've gone over a lot of bumps. The suspension is harsh, and I have a good back, and it's still giving me some problems. A lot of questions about this motorcycle in the MT09, but Tyler specifically, does the FTR compare to the new MT09 in performance and cornering? Can it wheelie? Wheelbase comparison, weight comparison. So generally, I would not compare this to the MT09. The MT09 is, in my opinion, a better motorcycle, and it's, for me, more fun. This is a really, really cool bike, but I'm not gonna cross-shop the FTR and the MT09. Last up, Vector Burn asks, what do you think the chances of Indian developing the platform further by adding different models based on the FTR, like touring ADV version or even a fully fared sport bike? I don't necessarily think Indian is all that interested in developing this platform too much further. Maybe we'll see an adventure bike, but I certainly don't think we're gonna see a sport bike. Indian takes a lot of their cues from what Harley does, because Indian is owned by Polaris, and Polaris makes side-by-sides. If Indian was on their own, I'm sure that they might wanna do more work on this platform, but I don't know that Polaris has the appetite for it. Now, let's get this bike back out on the road one last time and start finalizing my thoughts on this machine. Now I'm going to start wrapping this video up by telling a story. So I went to go pick this motorcycle up this morning from the guy who owns it, who's a buddy of mine, and we're talking about the bike, and he's showing me all the stuff that he's done to it. And you know, he says towards the end, he's like, I love it, but I don't love it. And I thought that was a little bit odd because, you know, it's a really cool bike. It's really flashy, right? And at 17,000 bucks, you know, I thought it would be, you know, one of those dream bikes that, you know, you get on and no matter what you do, you're super happy. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, no, you'll get it when you ride it. And after spending a day in the saddle on this motorcycle, I completely understand what he means. I love it, but I don't love it. It's great, but it's not that great, you know? It's got a lot to love about this bike. It is so full of character. The engine is so rowdy. It puts down a great amount of power and it handles beautifully. I mean, this thing is an absolute riot of a motorcycle. However, it's, how do I put it? It's got a little bit of that Tuono factor where it's so aggressive and so zoinked out that it's a little too much sometimes. Even in standard mode, it's really just like, gah, go, go, go. Rip the front wheel off the ground. Go faster, go faster, go faster. And, you know, the suspension, it handles it so well around a corner. This thing feels so nice around a corner, even though the front does get a little bit squirrely. But I'm sure you're hearing it in my voice as I'm going over these bumps. It's not a smooth ride. You know, I'm sitting here, you know, going over these things, and it's starting to give me a headache because all of the bumps in the road are going straight to my head. And, you know, the character of the engine, the way it makes its power is delicious, but it does have that flaw where if you're down in the lower parts of the RPM band, the fueling is a little bit abrupt and it's herky-jerky. It just likes to lurch underneath you. It's like it just doesn't know whether it wants to stay or it wants to go. So I definitely understand why somebody would love this motorcycle, but only in a certain light. For me, this motorcycle is for somebody who wants to who literally just wants to go fast on the weekend. That's really it. If you're looking for a motorcycle that is just every time you boot it up, it is a ton of fun, this is for you. And then when you couple the issues with the riding experience with some of the weirder problems that this bike has, like the menus being a little obtuse and the thing with the cylinder deactivation and how you can't change modes without, you know, going deep into the menu, I get why somebody would just be like, this is a good bike, but it's not great, you know? But, you know, it's also like, whee! Oh my god, it is fun in a straight line. I mean, it accelerates like crazy. And it does it with this low bellow that you can only get out of big V-twins. It's so cool. But if it were my money, I would not run out and buy this motorcycle. I just wouldn't. I thought I was gonna love it more than I do. And again, it goes to show you that when you're out test riding a motorcycle, it might make this splashy first impression. It might be like, holy cow, first impression blows me away. Put down my money on this bike. But then you ride it a little bit more and you're like, it's not exactly all I thought it was gonna be. But again, guys, don't get me wrong. Despite the fact that I don't love this bike, it's a great machine. The brakes on it, the handling, the engine. It's a really good package, but it's just not the bike that I would want for my street silliness. I would probably take the MT-09 SP over this motorcycle. I would. And there you have it, guys. A nice look at the FTR1200 Carbon. Let me know what you guys thought of this down below. And if you enjoyed what you saw, click all the buttons down there. Click that bell notification. Subscribe to the channel so that you can see more of these videos as they come out. Remember, guys, I'm posting twice a week right now. And I've got a whole bunch of bikes lined up that I will be doing Day in the Saddles on, as well as a couple of other video ideas I'm working on. So it's not all just news vlogs, guys. Just wanted to let y'all know. And while you're down there, if you wanted to support the channel, the Patreon is always open, as well as the donation button if you wanted to help, but you didn't want to subscribe. Again, big shout out to my buddy Michael for giving me this bike for the day, as well as Shifty Brisket for helping me upgrade my camera. I am still learning how to use it, but already the footage is looking so phenomenal. So big shout out to both of y'all, and I will catch you guys in the next one.